This is topic 14-6, solving quadratic equations by factoring. Our essential question today is, how can I solve quadratic equations using factoring? Our bulwark is a review problem dealing with linear equations, which best describes the effect of the graph f of x equals 4x minus 3 if the y-intercept is changed to 8. If we look at our original equation, we can tell the y-intercept is a negative 3. And so I would start at negative 3. And the slope is equal to 4. And we would go up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, to the right 1. Up 4, to the right 1, and up 4, to the right 1. Get an idea what that line looks like. If the y-intercept was changed to 8, that means our new y-intercept is going to be 8, but the slope is still going to stay the same as 4. So y-intercept of 8, here's our new y-intercept. I can't go up, so I'm going to go down. 1, 2, 3, 4, and to the left 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, to the left 1. You can get an idea what that looks like. Now, knowing what it looks like, and answer the question. The slope decreases? No, we did not change the slope. The line passes through the origin. That line does not pass through the origin. The x-intercepts increase. Let's look at our x-intercepts. For my red line, it's right here. For my blue line, it's there. So my new x-intercept is actually less than the original, so that one's not it. The y-intercept increases, absolutely. We started off at negative 3. We are now at positive 8. The correct answer is J. Some of you may have been able to figure it out just by looking at the information that was given. So before we can solve quadratics, let's talk about if the product of two numbers is equal to 0, then what must be true? So if I have 8 times some number has to be equal to 0, then we know that the number that 8 is being multiplied, it has to be 0. Some number times 3, if I want it equal to 0, then that number needs to be 0. This gives us then that any number x times some number, in order to get it to be 0, that number must be 0. We can also have that both numbers are 0. So 0 times 0 also equals 0. So what we find here is if we have a product that's equal to 0, then at least one of those numbers, at least one of them, must be equal to 0. So what we have in our first example, notice that we do have a product of two binomials. We'll try that again. We have a product of two binomials. So here's my product, and it is equal to 0. So what we've just learned is if I have two things equal to 0, two things multiplied together, one or both of them must be equal to 0. So what we're going to do then is set each factor equal to 0. So I'm setting each factor equal to 0, meaning I'm taking what's inside the parentheses, that's my factor. It's 3x plus 1. It has to be 0. Or the x minus 2 must be equal to 0 in order for us to be able to multiply these two things together and get a 0. Now we're going to solve for our variable. So let's recall how to solve for a variable. First thing we did was let's draw a line down the equal sign. So I'm going to do that. Let's start with the x minus 2. We're going to draw the line down the equal sign. So I'm writing the steps out in case you don't remember. You need to write those out also. So the line goes down the equal sign. The next thing we did was we boxed the variable. Then we get rid of the number that is not in the box. So to get rid of the number not in the box, we're either going to add or subtract that number that's not in the box. So this has a negative 2. We're going to add 2 then to both sides. When we are left, we still have the number in the box. The negative 2 minus negative 2 plus 2, they come out to be 0. And then 0 plus 2, we get a positive 2. We have isolated the x already. And so we have that x equals 2. So let's follow these same steps for our first one. We have our line. We're going to box the variable. We add or subtract the number that's not in the box. The number not in the box is a plus 1, so we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. When we subtract 1 from both sides, we still have a 3x inside the box. Plus 1 minus 1 is 0. 0 minus 1 is a negative 1. So our last step then is you're either going to divide or you're going to multiply by the number in the box. So I have a 3 times x in the box. The number in the box is a 3. Since it's times, we are going to do the opposite and divide. We'll divide both sides by the 3, gets rid of the 3 in the box, and we are left with x equals a negative 1/3. So in order for this to be a true statement, x has to be either negative 1/3 or x has to be a 2. I'm going to show you briefly how that works. I'm going to use the 2. If x is a 2, we get 3 times 2 plus 1, so that is 7. And then we also get 2 minus 2, that's 0. So 7 times 0 does equal 0. If we plugged in the 1/3, the 1/3 then, when we plug it into our first factor, that would come out to be 0. Our second factor would come out to be some number. If you look at your homework assignment, the very first 2 problems that you have are identical to the notes that the problem on the notes we just completed. Let's go to our second example on our topic. Notice, first off, this equation, it is not a product. We don't have a product, and we don't have it equal to 0. So we have 2 things that's going on. It's not equal to 0, and it's not a product. So what we have to do is get it equal to 0 and make it look like a product. In order to make it look like a product, that means we need to factor. But before we can factor, we have to get our equation set equal to 0. So let's start with that. The first step then is to set the equation equal to 0. I want to make sure when I'm looking to set the equation equal to 0, we are going to move the number that's by itself to the left. So the number moves to the left. And what I mean by that is this right side, we want it to come out to be equal to 0. So I ask myself, what would I have to add to 28 in order to make it equal to 0? So I can add a negative 28, or I can subtract 28 from both sides. Get another way of saying it. If I subtract 28 from both sides, on my right-hand side, 28 minus 28 gives us the 0. That's what we wanted to make sure is equal to 0. On the left-hand side, the 2 has an x squared, the negative x has an x, the 28 is all by itself with no variable, so there are no terms we can combine, so we will rewrite the equation. We have 2x squared minus x minus 28 equal to 0. Now that I have rewritten it as equal to 0, I'm going to cross it out, the original, so that I don't get myself confused. Now in order to get our equation to look like a product, that means we need to factor. So let's recall what we do by factoring. So we need to factor completely. And in order to factor completely, we have to find our S and our P's, which are the sum and the product. So looking at the equation, The sum comes from the number in front of the x, that's a -1. The product comes from multiplying our first and our last term together. So we have 2 times a -28, and 2 times a -28 is a -56. Next, we need to find the two numbers that are going to give us, that add up to the sum, but multiply to give us the product. So find the two numbers, add to get the sum, multiply to get the product. This is where most of my students have trouble, so we're going to use the calculator to help us out. And using the calculator, you're going to do y1, type in your product number, divided by x. y2, we're typing in the product number, whatever number you have for the product, divided by x plus x. So get your calculators out, and we're going to type that in. In our y equal, our product is -56, so we're doing -56 divided by x. Press enter, and then our second and y2, we're doing -56 divided by x plus x. Okay, this second step, putting in, notice you're putting in exactly what you had in y1, you're just adding x to it. So now we're going to use the calculator to look at the table. So second graph, in order to get to the table, I'm writing my steps down, hit second graph. You get to the table, you'll see an x column, a y1 column, and a y2 column. So as before, your x and your y1 column will give you all the factors of the -56. So I will look. 1 times a -56, that gives me -56. 2 times -28 gives me -56. 3 times this decimal will give me -56. 4 times -14 will give me -56. I'm only concerned with the whole numbers. Anything with a decimal I will ignore. So we will ignore the 3 in the decimal, the 5 in the decimal, and the 6 in the decimal. What we're looking for, though, in order to help us out, the second, the y2, tells us the sum of these two numbers. So it's helping us find the sum of the two numbers. So 1 plus a -56 in our last column gives us the -55. 2 plus a -28, the last column shows us, when you add them together, it's a -26. What we are looking for is the sum in that. So the sum that we got from our equation. So in this case, we need to find in the last column, y2, where it is equal to -1, because that is the sum we started off with. So let's arrow down. I'm arrowing down because I notice in my y2s, it is getting smaller. And so I'm looking to where it's -1. And I see, and y2 is -1. That's the sum I'm looking for. So the other two numbers represent the two numbers that will multiply to give us the product. So -56, the two numbers we're going to use is 7 and -8. When I multiply them together, they equal -56. When we add them together, they equal to -1. These are the two numbers that we need. Okay, we're going to use our calculator later, but first we now need to do our bottoms up. Bottoms up means we're setting up our fractions. And this is all a part of factoring. So we take the two numbers that we got, multiply to give us -56, and add it to give us -1. They go in the bottom of a fraction. And the numerator, or the top of the fraction, we take the number that is in front of the x squared. Now we will see if we can simplify the fractions. 2/7, I already know in my head it doesn't simplify, but let's use calculator just to prove it. So let's get out of our table by hitting second quit, or second mode, and we'll do 2 divided by 7, hit math, enter, and sure enough, it stays 2/7. Our second fraction We have 2 over negative 8. I see I have a negative, so I'm going to go ahead and keep the negative in the denominator. And now I'm just going to put the numbers in. So 2 divided by 8, math, enter, enter, and it becomes a 1/4. But the 4 is the one that's negative because the 8 was negative, the 4 stays negative. So now we use those fractions to rewrite our equation, make our factors. Here's my 2 parentheses. They will both have x's in them because our variable's x. And so from our first fraction, top number goes in front of the x, bottom number goes after. Since it's a positive 7, we put plus 7. Our second fraction we reduced, top number goes in front of the x, bottom number goes after the x. And we now have factored the 2x squared minus x minus negative 2x squared minus x minus 28 equals 0. Now we can take those factors, set them equal to 0 just like we did before. So we set the factors equal to 0. And then the last step we do is we solve them just like we did in the previous problem. So we have 2x plus 7. I'm going to set it equal to 0. X minus 4, set it equal to 0. If I need to remember how to solve, we can refer back to the previous page. But we draw a line down an equal sign, box our variable. For the 2x plus 7, we're going to add or subtract the number not in the box. It has a plus 7, so we do the opposite, minus 7. We have a 2x still in the box. 7 minus 7 is 0. 0 minus 7 is a negative 7. I have a 2x in the box. I need to divide out the 2. Divide by the number in the box. That gives us x equals negative 7/2. Our other one, x minus 4, we're going to add 4 to both sides. The x is by itself. 0 plus 4 is 4. We now have our solution to the equation. X is either negative 7/2 or x is equal to 4. So our last problem is a word problem, but you will see that it's still asking us to do the same thing. It's just now asking as a word problem. The area of a rectangular room is given by the equation w squared minus 7w minus 18 equals 0. So we have the equation w squared minus 7w minus 18 equal to 0. We want to find what the width of the room is. Notice in the previous problems, we were finding out what x was equal to. We want to find out what w is equal to, and that represents our width. So our first thing we do is make sure that the problem is set equal to 0. Yes, it is. Next, we have to make it look like a product, so we need to factor it completely. So to factor, we look at our sum and our product. Our sum in this case is negative 7. The product is going to be 1 times negative 18 because the number in front of w squared is a 1 if it's not shown. That's a negative 18. Now we need to come up with what are 2 numbers that will multiply, give you negative 18, but add to give you negative 7. You can use your calculator to help out with that, so let's do that. We put in our product. This time it's negative 18 divided by x. And then in our y2, it's negative 18 divided by x plus x. I want to go to the table, so the second graph. And now in my sum column, which is the y2, we are looking for negative 7. So when the y2 is negative 7, our 2 numbers are 2 and negative 9. Our 2 numbers are 2 and negative 9. We put those on the bottom of our fraction. Top of our fraction is the number in front of the w squared. Since the numbers are 1s at the top, there's no way to reduce that, so we'll use these in order to write our factors. So this time the variable is w. 1 goes in front of the w plus 2 afterwards. 1 goes in front of the w minus 9 goes afterwards. Now we have our factors. We'll take each one and set them equal to 0. So third step, we set the factors equal to 0. W plus 2 equals 0. W minus 9 equals 0. Notice I didn't use the 1 anymore because 1 times w is just w. Let's solve. Draw our box. Subtract 2 from both sides. We get W is equal to a negative 2. Our second factor, draw our box. Add 9 to get rid of the 9. We get W is equal to a positive 9. Our question did ask find the width. So I'm trying to find the width of a room. You have to ask yourself, can the width of the room be negative? And that answer would be no. So the width of the room then has to be the positive W value. So the width is 9. So when it's a word problem, you want to make sure that you answer the question that is being asked. All right, our summary is how do you solve the quadratic function equation when it's given in standard form? Well, I just wrote them on the side here. We have to set your equation equal to 0, factor it completely, set the factor equal to 0, and then solve for the variable. That concludes topic 14-6.